Welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami. The State Bank of Pakistan has raised the policy rate by 100 basis points to 17%. This was announced by the Governor, State Bank, Mr. Jameel Ahmed, in a press. There was a statement that was issued by the Central Bank as well after the Monetary Policy Committee's meeting, which says that the Monetary Policy Committee has noted that inflationary pressures are persisting and continue to be broad-based. And it also said it is critical to anchor inflation expectations and achieve the objective of price stability for the future sustainable growth. The meeting has also identified three areas that relate to inflation: the challenges to external sector, as well as the global economic slowdown and its impact on Pakistan's economy. In the presser, the Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, said that IMF's Extended Fund Facility, EFF, is critical to unlock the multilateral and bilateral inflows to the country, and the current account deficit has contracted, and the performance of Pakistan in the first 6 months of the current fiscal year had been better than expected. He also said the country's financial requirements for the current financial year are around $33 billion. We'll be looking into this, and to talk more about this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Salman, Executive Director, Prime Institute. Mr. Salman, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let's begin with this particular thing. When the Monetary Policy Committee identifies that inflationary pressures are there, persistent, and continue to be broad-based, and if they go unchecked, they could feed into higher inflation expectation. What does that depict and mean?
So Pakistan has been experiencing the increasing inflation for particularly last 1 year, and in this scenario, it is expected that the State Bank, as the central regulator, would hike up the interest rate. So this movement, this upward movement in the interest rate, is as per market expectations, and also since we are in IMF program, and according to also the sound economic policies, the interest rate have to be kept in positive territory, which means that they have to be above the inflation rate. Inflation rate is above 25%, and interest rate is now 17%. So it's still in a negative territory, but we are talking about core inflation rate. So it has to sort of follow that inflation trend. So the purpose is to check the inflation expectations, as the Governor rightly mentioned, and we hope that this will stem to some degree the rising level of inflation.
So does it mean when the statement says that it is critical to anchor the inflation expectations, by this measure, do you think that particular thing would be anchored the way it is sought?
So this is only part of the puzzle, obviously. When we're talking about inflation has several sources. So one key sources is coming from the energy costs, petrol costs, and also the indirect taxation burden, which we are all which we are all suffering from. Also the international conditions. If you look at even countries such as Japan, the inflation records for last 40 years have been broken. So there is this global upsurge in the inflation, and in this scenario, I think there is no other choice but to raise the interest rate to somehow anchor this expectation. Now, this cannot solve the hike in the prices unless we take other measures, talk about production.
So how is it going to impact the price stability?
Well, since the State Bank has achieved more independence in the last couple of years, at least in a sense of the Constitution, we would expect that this is the role of the independent State Bank to ensure price stability function. Since our economy is not fully documented, the influence, the effectiveness of the monetary policy is not economy-wide. So it means that there are other factors such as cost of doing business, input costs, which will still be at play. And this step alone is not going to reduce the inflation significantly.
Right. We are joined by another participant on the phone line, Mr. Khurram Shahzad. He's senior economist. Mr. Khurram, thank you very much for taking time out for views on news tonight. We really appreciate that. The policy rate has been increased to 17% by the State Bank of Pakistan. How do you think it would help anchor the inflation expectations?
Well, thank you very much for taking me on the show. I think inflation's main reason is food and energy prices, and those are, administered by the government of Pakistan. And as far as containing inflation is concerned, of course, policy rate does matter, and it reduces money supply, and it reduces incentive to consume over savings. So it is imperative, of course, to raise rates to contain inflation, especially core inflation, which is excluding energy and food prices. But you see, as far as entire MPS goes, entire monetary policy goes, it only works when there's a normal market working, at the moment. So, for instance, if today the market is not functioning as per its normal course, where imports are being restricted artificially, and at the same time, the rupee-dollar parity in the interbank market is being, held artificially. So in that case, I don't think monetary policy is going to be that lucrative and that much yielding as such. So I believe it's more, in anticipation of the IMF coming on board, then containing inflation, or containing the rupee dollar parity, or naturally containing
right, Mr.
imports.
Khurram, the statement issued by the central bank also says that the challenges for the external sector have increased despite the contraction of current account deficit. Why is that so? What major challenge do you think lie ahead?
You see, one of the major challenges is basically how to bring interbank dollar parity, dollar rupee parity to the market. I see this single factor coming into effect, so to make a way to not only to get to the IMF, but also to achieve a natural market where imports are naturally contained by a higher dollar rupee parity, and a natural containment of demand and supply. So I believe if we take one single decision today of taking rupee dollar parity to market levels, it will correct a lot of other issues as well.
Mr. Khurram, the Governor State Bank has to say that the exchange rate was market based and the fluctuations happened within the market parameters. And now it is also associated with the element of speculation as well.
Well, you see, it's not market-based as such. You tell me that there's a three-fold market going on right now. One is interbank market, where the rate is, of course, totally frozen. The next market is open market, right, where you go and buy dollars at a certain rate, and rate varies, from 240 rupees to 270 rupees. It varies in between such a high spread. And then there's this hawala and hundi market. You see, there's an illegal market going on where you satisfy your need easily. So one, we have to clamp down on the hawala market and the open market. One. Secondly, if you take your interbank rate to the market rate, it will automatically correct the hawala market also, because there'll be less incentive to go to that market compared to interbank market. And then you're losing on your remittances and exports also. You see, we have lost about $4 billion in the last 3 months just by keeping interbank market at the rate where it is right now. So there are a lot of confusions and a lot of distortions are taking place because of keeping three markets. So better to bring our parity to market so that everything gets settled on the market rate, on the official rate, and we get more dollars rather than less dollars.
So how critical do you think the IMF extended fund facility is in this particular regard?
It's all practical purposes, it's the only way forward. It's the last resort and the only resort for us to get the funding, so that our bilateral and multilateral funding also gets through. And we have to get to the IMF in any way possible, so that the earlier we get to the IMF, the better it is for us to satisfy all our debt holders and our friends and other multilaterals also. I think this is imminent.
So, Mr. Khurram, don't you think there should be a sort of flexibility on the part of IMF after the kind of devastation Pakistan accrued after the devastating floods?
Absolutely, there should be one, but you see, our credibility has been lost in the last, 33 programs, and we have not been able to implement one single program in its letter spirit. So, the credibility loss is much bigger than the loss on the economy side. So, I think IMF looks at that side also. Once we restore our credibility and we show them that we are committed, we do what you say, definitely they're going to help us, not otherwise.
So when it comes to current account deficit, the Governor State Bank says the performance was better in the first 6 months of the current fiscal year. How do you see that?
I think artificially holding back all the imports and closing down the economy would definitely give you a good number, but that's not the way forward. That's not how things should be handled. You see, if we don't have dollars for our debt repayments, then we should not be intervening in the market as such. We can raise money from our friends. We can clamp down on the grey market, on the different smuggling side, and then there are a lot of sectors which actually are not giving taxes. For example, real estate sector is totally out of tax. The agriculture the sector actually contributes 22% to GDP, and they contribute only 7% to the taxes. And this tobacco sector is there to be taxed, and the third one and the fourth and the last one is the retail sector. Four sectors are there lying idle and not paying any more taxes to the kitty. So why don't we tax them rather than we go to already taxed sectors and businessmen and individuals? So there are a lot of distortion in our own economy on the fiscal side and the current account deficit side, which we need to settle first, and then go to the IMF and ask for money.
So when it comes to broadening the tax net, so there was an internal assessment by FBR. The target for the current fiscal year was 7,470 billion rupees. The shortfall was 225 billion rupees. And now, if with this policy rate, if 170 billion to 200 billion rupees mini budget is brought in, do you think the deficit which has been internally assessed by FBR regarding broadening the tax net would be overcome?
I think as far as tax shortfall is concerned, I think as I mentioned, there are four sectors who should be taxed first, and then we should go to the already taxed businessmen and industries and individuals. First, we need to tax those who are not paying taxes, and we can generate easily by about 300 billion rupees additional from these taxes. You see, if you pose 1% on real estate, you'll be able to generate 80 billion rupees as per our estimates. And similarly, if you put a fixed tax on retail sector, you'll be able to, raise about 40 to 50 billion rupees additional. Similar situation goes with tobacco and, the other sectors. I mean, tobacco alone could help you generate 150 billion rupees. And at the same time, you discourage all the tobacco and, harmful products to your young generation. So at the same time, you can raise productivity also. So there's a lot of things that can be done, not only to raise taxes, but to, correct your economic disparity and demographics also. So there are a lot of potential that can be done. But all this, takes is a strong will and, the commitment that we are not supposed to. I mean, we seemingly do not have that right at the moment.
Right, Mr. Khurram, now the central bank has also identified there were certain banks when it comes to the exchange rate. They've accrued the profit of 100 billion rupees from January to September 2022 through speculation about the exchange rate. Now, the SBP has initiated an inquiry into that. Do you think any sort of levy on these banks or any sort of penalty on these banks could be imposed?
You see, banks are already heavily taxed. I mean, if you look at their effective tax rate, that comes to around 50%. 50% of their income, they're already heavily taxed. They should not be taxed even, anymore, because as I have highlighted, that there are other areas that should be taxed in first place. Secondly, it's not about taxing anyone. It's about use of that tax money. If you're not able to spend that tax money effectively, no matter how much you put tax on, and no matter who you tax, the tax money goes to waste. So it's about how you spend that money, not about how and who you're going to tax.
Mr. Khurram Shahzad, the senior economist, thank you very much for joining in tonight with us on Views on News. Really appreciate your time. Mr. Salman, when we talk about the challenges to the external sector, in your view, what those are, and despite there is a contraction of the current account deficit, why they are still persistent?
So I would like to talk about current account deficit, but allow me to go back on one important theme which you raised earlier, and that is about the tax and tax potential. First of all, I'd like to make a slight correction of the words which we used. Tax net is a kind of a derogatory term. I would prefer the use of the word tax base.
Right.
So we are not netting people in a sort of a
right.
Net. We are allowing people to build the base. So we should use the right word. Secondly, I think instead of thinking like taxation from a sector to sector perspective, we need to think about broad systematic reforms. That's what we have been arguing for a low rate and broad based taxation. So a low rate, without discrimination of any sectors, each one who is earning income above a threshold should be paying same rate of the income tax in this country. Secondly, we have, when we talk about tax, we have a significant amount of tax exemptions and tax incentives, which is almost 25% of the total tax collection last year. And if you remove those tax exemptions, then already significant amount of tax gap even within the formal sector can be fulfilled, and that can solve a lot of problem. Now, coming to the current account problems or the external challenges, obviously, when government started controlling imports, they were trying to control the trade deficit and the current account deficit by some artificial measures. The target was that we can bring down the current account deficit to some sustainable level. But the policy which was adopted was a flawed one, and as a result, which was rightly pointed out by Khurram earlier, that we had multiple exchange rate. Of course, in the long term, we have to invest in our resources and energies in the exports diversification, export expansion. But in the short run, allowing the dollar at its natural market rate is the solution. If in my view, the rupee needs to be further depreciated actually, and that serves an automatic check on the current account deficit. Rather than using administrative controls, we should allow the market-based exchange rate to do this correction. Of course, the other measure is the other source for our current account income has been the remittance flow, and has been noted that the remittances, at least from the official channel, the banking channels, has been unfortunately reducing. Now again, if we have a single dollar rate in the market and there is no like black market rates which is currently existing, then I believe that the remittance flow through our normal banking channel would increase significantly, and that will also address the external account. So these two measures, these two developments, increase of the remittance as well as also increase of the exports income. I believe that because of this situation.
Specifically, when we talk about increasing the export income, what are your suggestions in that regard?
So first of all,
in the short term.
So exactly. So I think first of all, if we allow the rate to function as per market rates, then I believe that the exporters would be incentivized to actually expedite their proceeds, which is currently being delayed in the expectation of profiteering. So that is, we are creating an incentive for them to make extra bucks, like as the governor of central bank mentioned, that the banks have made apparently 100 billion rupees because of the uncertainty in the exchange rate. So if there
he
is no
associates that one with the difference in the inflows and the outflows.
that is to do with the rate available in the market and the rate at which the LCs were opened. And the banks were apparently, according to the reports, were playing on that. And that is, of course, needs to be checked. And I hope that a report is out soon by the regulator, and the action needs to be taken. So that is separate. But the point is that we need to ensure that we have a dollar which is dollar rate which is according to the market forces, and that will address the remittance, that will address the exports flow in the short run. Because in the long term, of course, we need to increase the productivity, we need to increase the industrial base, but that is not something which is going to happen in the overnight basis.
So that element of speculation and the kind of profit, the certain 13 banks which have been mentioned by the Governor State Bank, what sort of an action could be taken regarding that?
The central bank has mentioned that there could be a regulatory action, and there could be also penalties. So we are waiting for that to the report to come out, and only then we can see. Of course, the central bank is in a better position to comment on that.
What possibly the ideal action in that regard out of the two could be?
Well, I believe if the law permits some kind of penalties, those penalties needs to be levied. But I remember there was a demand from the businesses, which were opening LCs, that difference needs to be paid back. So this is up to of course, the central bank and the banks which have been named in this phenomena, how they're going to actually react. But the point, I think, which we need to realize that any kind of speculation which is either happening in informal markets or even the formal markets is a result of emergence of black markets. And that is the point, that why we are allowing that to happen. I mean, this problem of multiple exchange rate was non-existent in Pakistan for last 30 years. So something which we have overcome in the past, this problem has come back. So we definitely need to take urgent measures to correct that. And while acknowledging that the governor is saying that we are not artificially influencing the rate of dollar, the finance minister is saying the same thing. But the point is that the actions which government is undertaking is leading towards those consequences. So that's why we are concerned about
crucial in this particular regard, bringing that parity of the exchange rate. The Governor State Bank says that when our IMF review is completed and the inflows are received, the market sentiment is of course going to improve, and this particular phenomenon of the difference or the depreciation, it's going to settle down because it's temporary. So how critical that one is in that regard?
Well, if you look at what is the government strategy is obviously relying on the flows from the friendly countries, right? And also rollover from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, from China. And I believe that these countries are again helping in the country, which we should all welcome. And I think the optimism comes from the commitment which the government has received. Some of these commitments have been already mentioned in the newspapers, and some will be forthcoming. And that is why the governor is saying that if we will have more inflows, dollar inflows, then it will have an impact on the sentiment on the foreign exchange market sentiment, which is which is right. We have, if our reserves going to increase, then obviously this uncertainty about the dollar availability to pay our next loans or the installment of next loan would be definitely decreasing. But I'm saying that this is not a policy measure. The policy measure has to be going back to basics, correction of the exchange rate, and then follow through. We can fall back on our friendly countries for emergencies, which we are doing now. But I hope that we need to come back to the program, which is suspended right now.
So we'll be
pending
talking
review
about this
actually
later on in the show. We are joined by another participant on the phone line, Mr. Ehtisham, senior analyst. Mr. Ehtisham, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. How significant is this policy rate when it comes to anchoring the inflation expectation in the country?
I think it was expected because there were already people were talking about this 4 or 5 serious conditionalities without which IMF was simply unlikely to offer anything. I mean, to resume its 3-year program, which has been now extended to 4-year program from $6 billion to $7 billion. People were expecting that there would be some kind of agreement with IMF, but that didn't happen despite the fact that the finance minister had said that inflows would start soon. Rather, if you remember, State Bank Governor had said last week that the next week inflows would start. But it was a lifetime, what you call it, embarrassment of recession today when he was announcing the monetary policy. He said that there are some delays in getting the inflows, which means
Mr. Ehtisham, I think I've lost the contact with Mr. Ehtisham. We'll try to connect back to him. Mr. Salman, so the impact of the global economic slowdown and its impact on the domestic economy, what's your take regarding that?
Well, I think this goes back to the COVID times, and the world is still recovering from the COVID era lockdowns, and then followed by lockdown. What governments all over did was monetary expansion. Governments both in developed world and also developing world announced significant monetary incentives and fiscal expansion policies for their government, for their public. Now, it happened in Pakistan also. Although that kind of, I think, measure was then appreciated by many, but according to some analysts, this has actually brought in long-term inflation in the system. Which is actually, if you look at the classic definition of inflation, this is too much money following too few goods. Now, what happened in COVID, our production, the global production system came to a halt, supply chain disruptions, and also the trade flows came to a halt. In this scenario, when we are pumping too much money in the system, the inflation skyrocketed.
Mr. Ali
So
Salman,
that is
beg your
what
pardon
happened.
for the interruption. I'll have to go back to Mr. Ehtisham is joined once again, a senior analyst. Mr. Ehtisham, now when we talk about the challenges to the external sector, now the Governor State Bank says that despite contraction of the current account deficit, the challenges for the external sector are persistent. What are those challenges and how these challenges can be dealt with?
One of the major things is that the way he has considered admitted that there are challenges on the external front means that the inflows are not coming. International financial institutions and bilateral creditors, they are hesitant to offer anything unless we just get into the IMF program again. And so is the situation with the Saudi Arabia, China, UAE. They are all asking us, in fact, to get into the program. And for that purpose, for that to happen, Pakistan needs, according to the IMF conditionalities, increase the power rate, 40% power rate, and then the 70%, the gas rate, and then $200 billion, according to the details, the new taxes for which it is being said that the next month there is going to be a mini budget, and then they are asking for structural reforms in the energy sector. I think the situation is pretty difficult, especially on two fronts. One is that the IMF is not offering anything, and that's why there's a problem in inflows, and we are hardly left with $4.5 billion. And then there was a problem when Shahzad had said that the foreign exchange reserves are not $4.5 billion, but they are $10.5 billion. The $6 billion belonging to the common man. He has also said that they also belong to the government. Then there was a panic in the commercial bank asking for withdrawing their dollars. The second thing is that despite the fact that they have increased the discount rate 1%, which is very alarming, already high time and an all-time high 16% and now 17%. That means that there is going to be some kind of a reduction in inflation. But you must have heard the governor, State Bank. He was in fact saying that he's afraid that core inflation is going to further increase. So I think on both the fronts, things are not, easy for the government. And, the political instability coupled with economic instability causing, the problem everywhere. The part of the problem is that our political, the parties, the leaders, they are simply unprepared to concede anything. So that everybody is saying what happened last week, the way, he has seen the very embarrassing moments. The Governor of State Bank, Hannan, went to Chamber of Commerce office, and the way he has been given the keys of their, the industry, and they said, you do better run, we are unable to run the industry. So I think government has to concede something in a way that what we call it the wheel of, the
Mr. Ehtisham, beg your pardon for the interruption. Already you mentioned in your view political stability of crucial importance when it comes to having economic stability. What do you suggest what all the political stakeholders, in particular those who are resorting to politics of confrontation and agitation, should do in this regard when the country is faced with so many economic difficulties?
I'm sorry to say that it's petty political interest or personal or financial interest, they're just giving preference on their national interest. And that's why, after having spent 10 months in the government, the PTM government has not been able to even reduce some of the major issues. And the reason is that both the government and opposition, they're having strong differences. And with this already, if we criticize the government, so is responsible Imran Khan and his party. We all think that at this moment they should continue putting a lot of profit. And this is what that will not.
Mr. Ehtisham, how important is a charter of economy at this point in time? The government and Prime Minister himself has repeatedly asked all the political stakeholders to chalk out a charter of economy. I think we have lost the connection with Mr. Ehtisham. So, Mr. Ali Salman, you were talking about the global economic slowdown and its impact on the country's economy. Please go ahead.
So I would just complete that point, and I'll come to this point of again the debt management here. We are mentioning the IMF program. Because of what happened in COVID and what governments did as a response to COVID, the world has entered into a recession at a very large scale, and developed countries is facing that. Developing countries are facing that. And also the Ukraine war has intensified the problems all over the world, especially in the region where it is affecting like commodities like wheat supplies. So it is going to take a toll on many economies. Europe is being affected, US, Japan is being affected. So that is unfortunately there's something we cannot escape. In the short run, what I hope to see is complete normalization of the international trade, which will then hopefully restore the shortages, and then we can hope to see the international commodity prices coming down in the near future. Now, let me address this very important point of the management of the debt and the choices which we have. Of course, when we are in the IMF program, then you have to honor the commitments. But given the situation, you mentioned about the pressure from the floods, for instance. I think this is the good time for the government to talk to IMF and all the creditors, and start discussing restructuring at least some part of our external and domestic debt servicing. As the governor rightly mentioned that this year, for instance, Pakistan owed $33 billion. Now, a significant part of it has already been arranged or paid. But even I think a restructuring of $2 to $3 billion in this year can create significant fiscal space for the government of Pakistan to not allow the hikes in the electricity prices or a further levy of the general sales tax or petroleum surcharge on the petrol prices. So there are ways to manage this burden by actually talking to some of the creditors. It is not possible to look at.
What if the IMF remains adamant of all the set conditions to be fulfilled by Pakistan, and at the same time the government is a clear vision that it is not going to burden the masses? So how the government can strike that balance?
So first, I think first of all, we have to commit to IMF about the policy rates, for instance, which I have already mentioned. So that is, I think, first condition. The second is that along with IMF, we have to talk to the creditors and sit down and agree to a new schedule of debt servicing this year. I think that is very much possible. If IMF sees that, okay, government is already, for instance, has increased the interest rate, which is in line with the IMF program, and going to further increase its credibility by allowing the exchange rate to be determined by the market forces, I think these two steps would be sufficient to restore the credit and the trust.
And when the Governor State Bank says that already, you also mentioned that of the 23 billion, $15 billion have already been paid, right? So we have to pay around $8 billion in the remaining 5 months.
There are still shortages, and I think that's what I'm saying, that instead of continuously going to the and being relying on the friendly countries as only one strategy, we need to sit down and reconsider that restructuring option, which means that the commitments which we have made this year in terms of external debt payments need to be reconsidered, and some of these payments can be made in the future.
So you're suggesting a rollover?
A rollover is being already being effectively carried out, but I'm saying a reduction in the external debt servicing this year to next few years, and then creating, let's say, if you don't have to pay $2 billion this year, this already means about 500 billion rupees. And that is the kind of envelope which we are going to be burdened with if we follow IMF program exactly. So there are these options. Currently, government is not open to consider these options, but this is just an opinion.
So when we talk about, there is another aspect to this overall equation, the circular debt. How to overcome circular debt?
Well, circular debt is a long-term problem once again. The circular debt, both in the electricity market and in the gas market, has crossed about 4 trillion rupees. So again, this is not something which we can address overnight. We can only hope that at least we can minimize the efficiency, the losses in the system, and so that we can we can actually pay for the IPPs for the PES, but the electricity being produced. A lot of electricity we are producing is about 20% is being lost in the system. So I think that is sort of a gain which we need to make. But in the long run, we have to make sure that we are not subsidizing, and especially the way we did in the previous tenure, that is going to be harmful. We need to take some tough measures even for our rural markets, I think, and as well as the commercial sector, which will then address some of these problems.
So what about the political stability in the country? We've seen the politics of agitation and confrontation. How much an impact did this situation have on the overall state of economy of the country?
Well, certainly it is having an impact when the investors or international institutions sees this extent of polarization that not even the opposition, the government could create a consensus on nomination of a chief minister, then certainly the political polarization has gone to an extreme, and this is taking a toll on the economic scenario. And I think in this context, the call for a minimum consensus on reforms, charter of economy, is the need of the hour.
So what could possibly the ideal contours of a charter economy at this point in time could be?
So considering that in my view, considering the problem currently, the economic the crisis is emanating from the ways in which the federal government is managing its finances, fiscal policy, which means both the taxes and the expenditure. So I think the main contours of the charter economy has to be a significant restructuring of the economy and the public finance system of the federal government itself, which means on one hand tax reforms, lowering the tax rate, broadening the tax base. On the other hand, withdrawing all the tax exemptions, taking back all the subsidies, and exemptions should also include any exemptions even given to the military establishments need to be taken back. And secondly, a significant cut on the public expenditure, especially in the case of state-owned enterprises, which are really choking the economy. So by taking and improving the public finance systems of the federal government itself, I think a significant part of the economic problem can be addressed. And then we can leave many other parts such as social protection or education or health to the choices of respective political parties. Now in the charter we cannot be too ambitious. We have to respect that each political party would have preferences, but I think there has to be consensus on how any government, any party which comes to power will be managing the federal government.
Right, your point is well taken. Mr. Ali Salman, Executive Director, Prime Institute, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News with us tonight. We really appreciate that. And with that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.